Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to do an update on the latest on the sudden stratospheric warming that did take place about 10 days ago now. We're really going to focus on the impacts in the coming weeks and months. Now, I've done numerous videos about this sudden stratospheric warming over the past kind of 6 weeks or so, looking at the sudden stratospheric warming, the actual event itself, and more recently the future impacts. Now, in today's video, we'll just do an update on what is going on up in the stratosphere, see if our forecasts and predictions from prior videos was correct, and of course then have a look at the future as well. What could be in store as we do progress into April? Because I think the real impacts will be felt late March through to April, or maybe not be felt. This is this kind of time frame where we'd expect to see some sort of consequences. But as we have alluded to before, most sudden stratospheric warmings do produce some sort of impacts at the surface, some sort of blocking patterns to our north, southerly tracking jet streams, and we're seeing hints of that. But some sudden stratospheric warmings don't have those impacts, or at least don't have those impacts across the North Atlantic. Blocking patterns occur on the other side of the pole, across perhaps Asia, towards North America, not directly impacting the UK. So there's a lot of moving parts at play, but I do just want to have a look at those latest ECMWF charts to see what could be occurring over the coming weeks. Now, we'll start by having a look at the latest with the stratosphere. Of course, we saw that sudden stratospheric warming about 10 days ago, where the zonal winds dropped below 0 meters per second, significantly below, got down to about minus 30 meters per second. So a ridiculously strong stratospheric warming. And yeah, we are still in negative territory, around minus 13 meters per second or from this data, which is as of the 18th of March. We're actually expected to weaken significantly into the final few days of March as well, back down to minus 25 to minus 30. So another warming occurring there. Again, you'd probably classify this as a major warming, but of course we're already in negative territory. So it's a bit of a minor warming, minor weakening in those zonal mean winds, or you could argue even strengthening of that higher pressure high up in the stratosphere. Now, of course, with this all occurring, we expect to see some of this propagating through the atmosphere, blocking patterns occurring not only in the stratosphere, where we're looking here, but down into the troposphere, which will affect our pressure patterns, which will affect low pressure, high pressure, jet stream, which does dictate whether we see warmer conditions, colder conditions, drier, wetter, all of that as we do head into early April. Now, if we do look beyond the next couple of weeks into April, this is something that happens every year. The polar vortex dissipates away. You see that from the thicker red line. That is the average for the zonal mean winds, and you can see they are relatively weak this time of year, around 12 or 13 meters per second regardless. But it's around mid to late April we expect the zonal mean winds to go towards zero or into slightly negative territory. That is the end of the polar vortex for 2024-25. Happens every single year, roughly mid-April, unless we see an early sudden stratospheric warming like we've seen this year. Sometimes we do see a rebound, i.e. next couple of weeks we go into positive territory. We're not seeing that, which is very, very interesting. As I've alluded to in a prior video, I've never actually seen this occur while looking at the longer range charts of kind of the last 5 or 6 years. Not seen a sudden stratospheric warming in February or March not recover before the final warming into mid-April. So we've basically hit our final warning about a month, maybe 6 weeks earlier than average. So as I said, we are expecting impacts from this, but it's just what will they be? Now, if you go over to the latest weekly mean anomaly charts for 500 HPA. So this is looking at the pressure levels at 500 HPA, so in the troposphere, generally the sort of level we look at when we're determining whether we've got high pressure or low pressure over the top of the UK. Now, these are longer range charts. This is not impacting anything you're going to see in the next week or so. So the base time here is the 18th of March. So it's a couple of days old, this data, but it's starting on Monday and goes to the following Monday. So these are weekly sort of time frames. These are weekly snapshots of the sort of patterns we're seeing. So not pinpointing exactly day by day, but giving a rough guideline to what we're seeing. And again, this is lots of ensembles added together. So we've got the whole array of spectrum here. So you can see as we progress into next week, high pressure to our north, low pressure drifting southwards. And this is something we have seen cropping up within our daily videos, a southerly tracking jet stream for the final week or so of March. And that's exactly what we've actually got here. Low pressure diving into Iberia, southern France, the Mediterranean, most likely seeing northerly or easterly flows on its northern edge. Given we've not got low pressure across Eastern Europe, there's not really a cold pool to tap into. So it's still going to be chilly, and that's what we have seen from our daily videos, but nothing, remarkable if we're being completely honest. Below average, potentially frost starting to occur again, and it could be pretty unsettled, especially in the south with low pressure moving in. So it's not a classic Scandinavian block, Greenland block, even North Atlantic ridge giving very cold conditions, but it's blocking to our north, that is shifting the jet stream southwards and giving us a bit more of an unusual pattern there as we do end March. Whether this is a direct impact of the southern stratospheric warming, perhaps an indirect impact, we can never say for certain, but all we can say is we've seen a southern stratospheric warming, we're seeing blocking patterns occurring more in the coming weeks. As we progress into the first full week of April, that pattern solidifies. Quite strong high pressure to our north and pretty low heights there to our south. And again, southerly tracking jet stream, potentially lots of rain and maybe some storm systems into Central Europe. Now, we've not seen any storms within the daily videos yet, but again, we are looking at about 2 weeks ahead. But given the southerly tracking nature of this jet stream, wouldn't be surprised to see lots of heavy rain as we start to see some moisture getting picked up from the Mediterranean, warm on its eastern flank, cooler on its northern flank, which would involve the UK. So that's the kind of pattern we could be expecting here. As I said, it's not a classic cold spell pattern. Of course, we are getting into April by this point, but it's the sort of pattern to give wet, cool, miserable conditions. And that's what I have said could be a potential consequence into spring. Of course, we do start to run out of that very cold air to our north, so a very cold spell, a beast of these or anything like that can kind of get ruled out from around mid-March onwards. So pretty much out of the realm of seeing anything ridiculously cold. The next kind of worst thing would be this sort of pattern, which is cool, wet, miserable, and that is what this latest chart is showing. Now, the following week into kind of mid-April now, still significant high pressure blocking to our north. That low pressure signal has degraded away from our south. Again, that could be that low pressure moves away. It's a bit of a transitional week, because as I said, this is a weekly time frame. Or it could just be that the signal is not that strong. We're getting towards mid-April, so we're getting sort of 3 or 4 weeks away. So the model doesn't have a lot of confidence in that low pressure, a bit more of a muddle pattern. But does say that the strength of that high pressure to our north within the ensemble output is fairly strong. And as the subsequent week, very similar pattern, lots of blocking to our north, a bit more low pressure appearing there out into the Atlantic. And again, a pretty classic negative NAO. Again, a pattern that is quite usual to see after a sudden stratospheric warming. And then finally, into the final frame, still high pressure to our north, perhaps more easterlies or northerly flows. Again, we wouldn't expect anything major cold. It's end of April here, but definitely increases the chances of something chilly and potentially something unsettled, especially in the south. So yeah, very, very interesting here from the ECMWF weekly mean anomalies. Definitely suggesting the risk of high pressure blocking is there. It is in the model output. We are seeing quite strongly here as we do progress over the next kind of 4 or 5 weeks. Now, the real question is the details. Very strong signal here. Just how will that equate to rain, sun, cloud, colder conditions at the surface? As we'll have to wait and see exactly how things sort of fall out. Of course, we'll just take today, for example. We've still got the same area of high pressure that we've had a few days ago. So they're still over the top of us, but today temperatures are getting towards 20 degrees. A few days ago, it was 7 or 8 with overnight frosts. The only difference is a subtle shift in wind direction. And generally speaking, on a chart like this, what we've got today and what we had a few days ago looks exactly the same. It's all about subtle shifts in those orientations, just draws in a slightly different air mass. So that's why it's really, really difficult especially as we head into spring, where we can see cold conditions, we can see warm conditions, we can see pretty much everything. It does get very difficult to extrapolate from these charts, but just simply because very small shift in the orientation of the high can give drastically different issues and consequences at the surface. Now, the final chart I just want to show you is the weather regimes. Now, we've run through this quite a lot recently, but again, I'll just explain briefly what is going on. We've got, I guess, 5 different shades here. We've got a blue shade, which is a positive NAO, which is generally a strong jet stream, flat in off the Atlantic, normally stormy, wet and windy. Again, to varying degrees, but generally speaking, low pressure towards Greenland and Iceland, high pressure towards the Azores, and more of a flat westerly. Now, red is a Scandinavian block, so we're looking at high pressure around Iceland, Svalbard, Scandinavia, and again, doesn't necessarily mean a beast from the east, strong easterly winds. It could just generally mean a bit above average heights there, shifting the jet stream southwards. We've got negative NAO, which is high pressure, North Atlantic, high pressure up towards Greenland, and then low pressure towards the Azores, perhaps more easterlies, northerly flows, and generally speaking, more in line with colder patterns. And then we've got purple, which is Atlantic ridging, which is generally just an amplified jet stream. So it could actually be high pressure, it could actually be northerly winds. It all depends on the positioning of that high. But generally speaking, it is amplified jet streams, has quite a varied pattern. And then finally, we've got no regime, which is kind of in between. Every kind of scenario kind of fits into one of these. There are some that are not really, they're kind of really fuzzy between the lines. Those go into the no regime here. So generally speaking, if we look at the bottom, what the favoured option is over the next few weeks, there's pretty much one option. It's red, Scandinavian block. Now, there is quite a lot of probability of the other ones, but it's about 40 or 50% on some members are going for a Scandinavian block. And that's very similar to what we just saw from those weekly anomalies with high pressure to our north and northeast. Again, doesn't mean necessarily easterly winds, but what it does mean is there will potentially be higher chance of easterly and northerly flows and a southerly tracking jet stream. And again, that southerly tracking jet stream could be through the Bay of Biscay, and that could bring channel lows, cut off lows, and it could, even though it looks high pressure dominant here and high pressure dominant from those weekly mean anomalies, it could actually be very unsettled, potentially some thunderstorms as well. That sort of pattern could occur in these sort of scenarios. I think other than that, the biggest thing to take away from this chart is the real absence of blue. Blue is normally a very dominant colour, especially through autumn, winter, and even into spring. Maybe not as much into the spring, as we do generally see more blocking patterns occur as the polar vortex does degrade away. But regardless, there's ridiculously low numbers here of blue, indicating a strong jet stream, a flat jet stream, lots of deep areas of low pressure. Powering off the jet stream like a conveyor belt is not looking likely. So a very low probability of that. So the one good thing we can kind of infer from this is that precipitation hopefully shouldn't be too heavy and too widespread. Again, we can't talk for everywhere, so if a channel low occurs or a cut-off low occurs, there will probably be a lot of heavy rain where those systems do sit and develop, especially potentially in the south in this sort of scenario. But generally speaking, we're unlikely to see massive storm systems barreling in off the Atlantic, widespread yellow, amber warnings for wind or rain. Those sort of scenarios look very, very minimal here. But more local, heavier bouts of rain, potentially thunderstorms, bands of heavy precipitation in the south especially, maybe the west, those do look like a real possibility. But even if that occurs once a week, a couple of times a week, with a lot of high pressure around, we probably would still see plenty of dry and sunny conditions. It's just then about the temperatures. How cold will it be? As I said, just from looking at the latest daily videos and of course looking at those weekly mean anomalies, I don't think it's looking too cold. Yes, a couple of degrees below average is definitely looking like a real possibility, but significant cold not seeing much evidence of that yet. I think the biggest impact we're going to see is that southerly tracking jet. So let's keep a very close eye on how this does develop over the next few weeks. For the time being, though, do think we are seeing consequences of this southern stratospheric warming. You can see it by this thick bar of red to the bottom of the screen. Just big blocking, and potentially could give some unusual conditions, unusually persistent conditions as we head over the next few weeks. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.